Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Be Extraordinary podcast. Very special episode today. This is actually unveiling behind the curtain of Erb and Young. We have run a personal development call series. It's a team call for almost 15 years now. Actually, before Erb and Young was actually physically created, we had been running this call for years with the three of us. And so since the inception of Erb and Young 12 years ago, we have been doing this every week or bi-weekly. It's an involuntary call. It's an opportunity for people to plug into our system, all team members. It's exclusive to our team, and go through a personal development book. We do a chapter a week, and there's a leader of the call. There's somebody who introduces the leader of the call. There's a very precise method to the madness, and it gives team members an opportunity to discuss some really cool topics, develop together, build culture, and ultimately learn some skill sets that are transferable to the workplace. So this is the first time we've ever done this. I hope you guys get a lot of value out of this. It's something that's been super special to us, and hopefully it'll bring the same special value to you guys. Hey guys, this is Brett Young, Taylor Young, and Rod Erb, and you're tuned in to the Be Extraordinary podcast with Erb and Young. Real conversations about business, leadership, and personal development.
Absolutely ingredient to success. And as in fact, if you ever get a chance to read Becoming Superhuman, it's Becoming Superman. Basically, it's I probably butchered that title, great book, but it's about flow. And it talks about being 4% out of your comfort zone. Meaning you don't have to be, you don't have to be way outside your comfort zone. You just have to be 4% outside of what you're comfortable with for an extended amount of time. So I would just challenge you, if work is not challenging to you, you should probably pick a different craft. If showing up at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday isn't challenging for you, you should probably pick a different drive. If raising kids is not challenging for you, you should probably have another. So congratulations to all you guys for showing up tonight, and we're going to get into some really cool content. This is by far my favorite book that I've ever read. As far as from a business perspective, I've learned so much from this book. It's meant a lot to me. I read this book from a recommendation, and then we read it as an executive team, and we went through a really cool exercise for us, and then we used that same type of framework and did this at the summit for those of you that are at the summit. And so the framework in this book, to a lot of extent, was performed at the summit, and we had massive results come out of the summit for the last 2 months that all of you have had the privilege to experience, engage in, and be able to put a notch on your belt. And there is no, to me, there's no shock and mystery centered around why that is. And one of them in which is the principle I get the privilege and opportunity to talk about tonight, which is conflict. We engaged in a discussion for, I think it was an hour at the summit in regards to different debates on how to get to a specific outcome. And the portion of that exercise was to genuinely discuss and debate and have conflict centered around what the best path to get there would be. And I think I'm very happy that you asked me to do this call, because for me, I have a lot of deficiencies that I'm working real hard to get better at. I think one of the things that I'm been privileged to, for whatever reason, is God's given me just an ability to have conflict at a high level, and it not to be a burden, and it not be a hindrance to getting to an outcome. I believe, and I have just fundamentally leaned into for a very long time, that conflict is a very, very good thing. And so I'm really excited to dive into this tonight, because a lot of personal philosophies that I have match up. Now, I will tell you, being vulnerable and transparent, the challenge I have found is that you have to do conflict the right way. And, throughout my journey through that space, I sometimes I don't do conflict the right way. I haven't always approached it the right way. And there are negative consequences for that, big time negative consequences for that. So on my personal journey, I know I'm looking to have better conflict and more productive conflict. And that's a fun thing I get to navigate personally. But the idea of having a debate or having even a passionate discussion with somebody is something that I fundamentally believe is at the core of a healthy relationship. And it's cool to see this in this book because it's the first book that I've ever picked up in my entire personal development career that's ever discussed it, ever. Out of the hundreds of books and years of dedication to the craft of becoming more, it is the only time I've picked up that has had this type of discussion centered around this. And I think it is so taboo in the business world. I think it's taboo in marriages. I think it's taboo in any relationship. And so I wanted to kind of ask you guys tonight to be transparent, vulnerable, and engage. And so if you're thinking, maybe I should probably say something, I really do want you to say something tonight, because I want to discuss this on why is it being fully vulnerable and transparent and honest about this subject. Why is it, do you believe, maybe you're good at maybe you avoid conflict. I don't know what your bias is. But if you avoid conflict, what is it? Because most people avoid conflict, if we're being honest. What is the reason to the core of which you would say, especially in the workplace, right? Especially in the workplace, what is the reason, and there's no right or wrong answer here, it's a discussion. What is the reason that, you think that either yourself or others, would rather move away from conflict or avoid it rather than leaning into it? I wanted to kind of open up with a question here. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts before we dive in.
I'd like to jump in on that one. Sometimes it's just easier not to hurt someone's feelings, because sometimes when you want to talk about conflict, some people just don't know how to control their emotions or how they feel about things. So sometimes for me, it's just easier if someone disagrees just to move on, because you don't want to create an argument where someone gets heated and they get into their emotions, and then it just creates awkwardness in the office. Not saying we have that ever, but I've dealt with it in other offices.
Absolutely. It's a great answer, man. And regardless, I think how you do it, that's just human behavior, right? So that's always going to be on the table. It's always a risk in which you engage anybody. It's a very, very, very cool thought.
I can add to that. I would say, obviously not at Erb and Young. I haven't had any issues here. But in previous positions in other industries, depending on the environment and the culture, you might be afraid to, and I have been afraid to say anything for fear of, being the problem employee that, has the conflict or approaches people with an issue. And then the fear, I'm a people pleaser. So like upsetting someone, like Gian said, or fear of losing your job, and then being, the person that is argumentative. It's all about tact and how you approach the situation, but it can be a fear too of outcomes within the company.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody on this call, if they were honest with themselves, would say, yeah, they're shaking their head. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to say the wrong thing and piss off the wrong person, and upset somebody, and they don't like me. So, something happens. So good for you. Thank you for sharing that thoughts. I agree 100%. Anybody else?
Hey, Brett. Eric.
Anybody else?
Eric. Oh, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, as you say that, I just thinking out loud a little bit. It's maybe outside the workplace or just in life in general. It's for me a little bit. I think the avoidance comes in if it's the like with the least importance, the conversation or the potential debate or argument may be. I think the more important the thing is, and the more comfortable I am with the person, the more I'm willing to create conflict. And honestly, the more passionate I am about it. But I think if someone's, for me, if I'm creating conflict with you, I can only speak for myself, but it's like it's something that means a lot to me, or the other person I'm talking to means a lot to me. Where if it's something that's like, listen, this does not have a high level. This is going to just go bad because there's really not a lot here. So that was kind of my initial thought.
You have more to lose from dealing with the emotional baggage or conflict with the person itself than the outcome of improving or getting to an agreement of whatever we're talking about. Yep. I get that. Totally makes sense. And that trust, right? That trust is obviously huge. I mean, we've talked about that in previous chapters. And, if you don't have that trust, it's very difficult to have a productive conflict. So I agree with you. I guess what I'm saying here is a great basis is with let's assume that we have the trust built. Let's assume that we've had the trust and there's a high level of trust and some opportunity comes up and, we think, man, should I say something? Should I not say something? Should we have a discussion? Should I do it here? Should I wait until later? Have anybody had that experience where you're like, man, should I have this conflict now? Or is the right thing to do to like pull this person aside 2 days from now and say, hey, can I go take you to lunch? And what's the right outlet? Has anybody had that experience where they just don't know how to handle it?
I resonate with that a lot. I think in the heat of the moment, and if there is a heat of the moment type situation, I think egos kind of get checked and pride becomes, a factor where there's no reasoning at some point. So I'll let the dust settle a little bit. I'll let the flames, taper down to bring it up in a more calm environment. I found more success with that, kind of going back to what Gian said. The battle might not be over, but, you just don't want to stir the pot to get an even more negative reaction because people are reacting at that point and it becomes more emotional.
So great. So good. I know we've been on phone calls and we've had heated discussions and passionate debates. And I know I could raise my hand 100 times with allowing ego to get involved and passionate and heated. And you've been kind enough to give me a lot of grace and we work really well together. And I appreciate you for that. It's one of your superpowers to be able to, keep things in check, man. So that's super cool that you would bring that up. And that's awesome. That's really good. Anybody else want to share anything real quick before we move on? These are great, guys. This is awesome.
I kind of wanted to speak to what Emmer said a little bit about kind of the in the moment. I've had both experiences where in the moment, I've created the conflict or basically brought the conflict to the surface because it was already there in my mind, right? I've had both scenarios where it's if it's coming from a place of I think it's intention behind it too. If it's coming from a place of emotion or the core of it is just frustration and annoyance or whatever it is, whatever negative emotion you want to associate with it, then it can definitely boil over very quickly. But it's if you're able in the moment to know that my intention going into this is the improvement of whatever the relationship is, and it's not an intention of being right. It's hashing it out, in a respectful and honest way, right? I think the intention matters so much, and I think I personally have experienced a lot more of the former, a lot more of the in the moment is not the best time. But I do think there have been moments for me, and I think other people might be able to relate to this, where it's if I'm able to acknowledge in the moment that this isn't driven by an overall feeling of whatever negative feeling it is, and I'm able to have that intention going into it, then an in the moment discussion can be, I think, fruitful with, as long as the other person is receptive to that, right? It's definitely assessing the temperature of the situation is can be an art in and of itself. But anyway, that's all. I have. Back to you.
That's super good. That's great. I think for me, I think that's a muscle, right? I think some of the best conflicts that I've experienced, I look back and I'm really proud of myself, is when you're in it and you're able to address it, but you're not emotional. It's a very logical. You can tell that the intention of the conversation is to get to the best outcome, not to jab somebody or to ruffle feathers or to be right, like you said, right? And I think that comes with this. I think it's a skill. I think that's the more reps you have. And candidly, if you're on this call, I would even offer, I don't think nobody's perfect at this, and I don't think you get perfect at this. I think it's a work in progress. But I know that one of the best ways to get good at this is to do it wrong, and then you learn the right way, in my opinion, because you go, man, that's the worst feeling. I don't ever want to experience that again. But the challenge also becomes, man, I don't want to have that conflict again. You know, I don't know if you guys experienced this where you have a conflict, oh God, and you're reluctant the next time to even bring it up, or you're reluctant to say anything, or you're reluctant. And that's, to me, is a challenge, is the dichotomy. It's that back and forth together where it's like, man, it's got to be important enough to have this conflict, but it's got to be done in a constructive way. And is the juice worth the squeeze, like Eric said? And so, guys, those are all great thoughts. And I have a couple notes I'm going to run through here, but those are really good thoughts. That's a great temperature on, speaking of temperature, Christina, on kind of where everybody sits. And what's great is, like, I don't think we train on this enough. I don't think we teach on this enough. There's no conversations about this, but yet every single person in a work environment who has relationships with another person deals with this at some point, right? It's one of the most important subjects you could possibly talk about. And to me, I think it's worth a deep dive, but I had a couple of notes that I wanted to share with you guys today after that, and I'm going to run through it, and then I have another question for you. But, you know, my internal conversation and dialogue of this when I was reflecting is, why do we not engage in conflict? And to me, I think it's because most of us have a philosophy that doesn't serve us. It's I don't want to say bad philosophy, but I just want to say a way of thinking that's not necessarily serving the purpose and the outcome that we're actually looking for. And for those of you that have been here long enough, you would probably know how to repeat this off the top of your head. But for those of you that have not, the way that we would define philosophy is what you believe internally, and then how you hold it, how it impacts or affects what you do, the actions that you take. And so here are some of the philosophies that I think most of us have had or do have centered around conflict. The conflict means that you don't like someone. The conflict means that you're difficult. Christy, you talked about this. The conflict means that we have to slow down what we're doing. I know we've had executive meetings and we've gone on tangents for an hour and a half about some sort of subject. If Rob, Taylor, and Jessica are on this call, you know, I'd love for them to chime in. I'm sure they're nodding their head. And sometimes it's frustrating because we're trying to get to 4 other things and we're sitting an hour and a half going back and forth about this issue, even though you feel very confident that it should be X, and you feel like it's a waste of time. You feel like you're having to slow down. You're already under pressure to get stuff done, and you're worried about the next stuff. So I think that's a big one for me, at least. I don't know if anybody can relate to that. And then conflict means I could ruin the relationship and ruin the trust. I think a couple people hit on this before. And in order to approach, in my opinion, being able to have constructive conflict, if you decide and believe that that's important based on reading this book, I would encourage you to make that decision yourself. I think we have to replace that philosophy with something. If we can all agree that philosophy, those philosophies that I just named, conflict means I don't like somebody. Conflict means we're difficult. Conflict means we have to slow down. Conflict means I could ruin the trust of the relationship. If those are the mechanisms that are subconsciously program us to take the actions that we're taking, whether we're conscious of the fact that we adopted those philosophies or not, I think it's important for all of us to figure out what is our stance on conflict, not what you believe based on what you read in a book, but how you truly act in how you've worked for the last, 20, 30, 40 years. And in order to do that, we have to recognize where we sit, and then we have to replace that with something else. And until we replace that with something else, to me, all of these other philosophies are going to move us towards avoidance, unless we have a really big issue that needs to be addressed. And to me, I think when I hear conflict, it's got this negative connotation to it, where it's like, oh, conflict means we're having an argument. Conflict means this negative thing. Conflict means we have a problem. Does anybody relate to that? Like, conflict equals problem. Conflict equals big deal. Conflict equals emotion. Conflict equals, just the word itself creates this uneasy feeling in our body. If we were being honest with ourselves and took inventory of how we felt when we bring the subject up. But to me, conflict. So here's a philosophy that I have adopted for 15 years. And I want you, if you're taking notes tonight, I want you to write this down because it changed my life. To me, and again, you're going to come up with your own philosophy. I'm just asking you, maybe you want to borrow from somebody else's because it's helped me a lot. Conflict creates understanding. Conflict, there's a reason we do a debate with anything that's important, whether it's formal on TV or whatever. It's because we want to understand what's happening. We want to understand the subject. We want to explore. We want to dive deep. So to me, constructive good conflict is so much more about understanding than it is about getting to what the best thing to do is or what the best way is, right? And here's what I mean by that. Conflict equals understanding means I'm not necessarily always worried and looking for what's the best way and right way to do it for this particular issue that we're having a conflict. I'm trying to understand what the other person's perspective is and where they're coming from and why. Because the only way for me to make sure that that's not the right way to do it, or that's not the best way to do it, or there might be secondary consequences in doing that way, is I have to understand their perspective. And I have to understand where they're coming from. The only way to compromise and commit to some sort of path or decision is to understand the other person's perspective. You can't do it. Otherwise, you have all these unknown factors that you haven't explored. And if you have all these unknowns attached to a specific subject, then reality is you have this beta of risk that has this big question mark on it, which means inevitably you're going to get a right hook to the face and you're going to say, man, I didn't see that coming, right? So for me, I think we need to replace the philosophy that we have around conflict. And one that's worked for me is conflict creates understanding. So conflict isn't bad, conflict is great. If I'm trying to be more understanding of any subject, the more conflict I can have, the better. Now, how you handle that is a completely different subject, because if you handle things incorrectly and you don't treat people with respect and it's not constructive, then you're not going to get to understanding because people's walls are going to be up, right? They're guarded. So that's first for me is like, okay, what's our philosophy on conflict personally? And then is that serving us? If it's not serving us, then what do we replace it with? So what I want to do is, I'm going to skip this. What I'd ask you to do is do this. Write down this on your notes. What is a more constructive philosophy that you could adopt? If we can recognize and because the philosophy that is not constructive, what is the philosophy that you could replace it with? Maybe you write down 2 or 3. Just brainstorm. What's a positive one? You know? And chew on that. See how it feels when you write it out. What does that look like? And then I wanted to kind of close here, get some thoughts on this chapter because, this is a really cool, I love that it's a fable and it goes through this fable because it's such a great way because storytelling is how we learn everything. And it's such a great, effective way to do it. But there's a point in the chapter when Nick basically says some comments that are pretty cutting to Catherine when they're in a meeting. And he basically says, hey, look, you might be great at team building, but you don't know anything about the business. So why don't you leave it to us? And you can imagine Catherine sitting in front of her entire executive team and somebody saying that to her. You can imagine the emotion that goes in her mind, that goes into her body when she feels that. And she talks about how she knew it was going to be blowback at somebody and she was going to have conflict with somebody, but she didn't know it was going to be at her being the target. And I love the way she handles this because it's such a boss move. She basically goes to Nick and says, hey, would you rather have this conversation right here or would you rather have it one-on-one? And there's a certain point of this that I want to bring up for any and all of us that are engaged in this. There's a certain level of line that she holds that says, hey, that you've obviously just stepped over a boundary of mine, but I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. We can have the conversation in private, or, we can have it here if we want to do it now. And he decides that we're going to have it one-on-one. And then she addresses it calm. And then it says specifically, as soon as they're gone, Catherine spoke, but in a confident and relaxed way. in a calm and confident and relaxed way, far more in control than Nick had expected. Okay, first of all, don't ever slam one of our team members when that person's not in the room. I don't care what you think about Mikey. She's part of the team. And if you have issues, take it directly to her or take it to me. You're going to have to make that right. That is a conflict. These small little things that you could just not say something, and these small little things that you could blow out of proportion. What is our variance there, right? It's like, oh, it's not big of an issue. I shouldn't say anything. But then it's like, man, I could blow this small thing way out of proportion. It makes a bigger problem than what it really is. And so there's this sweet spot in the middle of this art of conflict that if we can master it, it is like a superhuman power, right? To where instead of letting something build up to where you have a problem with somebody, or letting something build up into where you're way down the road on an initiative that you didn't want to be, and because you should have said something 3, 4, 5 months ago, but you didn't want to because you didn't want to have a conflict. Being able to have these many, tiny, little constructive understanding sessions with people and things along the way, to me, is such a superpower. And I think it does come from having trust. I think, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think before we have these conflicts with other people, we have to make sure that they know that we give a shit. They have to know that we're coming from a place of where we genuinely care for them as human beings. And unless you've done that first, I would say you're right. It's not worth having the conflict because you haven't earned the right. You haven't built the trust. So I would just challenge everybody that's on this call. Something that I think about all the time is, have I earned the right to have that mini conflict? Have I earned the right to pull that person aside and say, hey, look, that's out of bounds. Does that make sense? And then go, man, you're right. Because they know I'm coming from a good place. A lot of the people, even the people on this call, even new people on this call, like, I haven't earned that right yet. So I'm not going to do that. Like, why would I haven't built the trust yet. But if you've built the trust at these events that we do, at the team building that we do, the culture, this is why we do these things. So you can meet people and get to know them and build deep relationships with them. If you've done that and they know you're coming from a good place, how do we address these small conflicts without blowing it into something and making a bigger issue, but also not just letting something go and building it up? So that's I wanted to do kind of to close out and ask that question. What are some ways, maybe, obviously, name names because it's, nobody wants to put anybody on blast, but what are some things that maybe have worked for you, whether it's here, whether it's in your past career, whether it's in the place where you were before this, maybe it's at home, whatever, maybe, to where there was a situation that is small, but you addressed it and didn't blow it up into a bigger thing than what it could be. If you feel comfortable enough to share that, because I have one, I'll share it with you. I would love to. I'd love to hear that. It'd be cool to be able to hear from somebody else. I know it's a sensitive question, so don't feel obligated if you don't want to.
Just generally, no specific instance, but I always try to, obviously, kind of gauge your crowd. You want to validate the other person, and then you want to simply state your intention is to help in a calm way. I mean, if you begin that way, if you create this culture of sharing instead of discrediting the other person, I think your opinions would go a long way, and they might actually accept it. So,
love that.
I mean, I use that kind of as a formula to enter something really dangerous, kind of gauge the temperature, don't discredit the other person or other opinions in the room, and state your case without overtaking the conversation.
I love that. Yeah, you're so good at that. That's awesome, man. That's really cool. Lower the guard, make the other person feel heard, make sure they understand that they have a credible point. However, you have something else you'd like to share, and if they're open to it, that you're coming from a good place. That's great. That's great. Well, I have one last thing to close. And thank you so much for sharing that. You're one of the best with that. And there's no doubt. That's why everybody loves to work with you. And I'd sign up to, go into battle with you any day, man. So you're an incredible leader. The last thing I wanted to share was just, for the leadership, and hopefully everybody on this call aspires to be a leader in some shape or form. One of the principles that I love in this book is leadership recognizing that there is a conflict. between another person and another person. They have different opinion on how to skin the cat. They have different perspectives on how it should be. I think a lot of times leadership doesn't want to see a conflict happen. They don't want the two people to have a conflict, so they buffer it. And I love that she talks about this or what she does is engages them and encourages that conflict. But she frames it, meaning there's conflict that arises. Two people are engaged in a process where they're not necessarily seeing eye to eye, and maybe temperatures go up a little bit because there's conflict. That's just nature. The leader understands and recognizes what's happening and doesn't get uncomfortable about it, but has a philosophy of conflict equals understanding and sees it as, oh, wow, this is a huge opportunity for these two people to have a breakthrough. I'm going to go ahead and be a referee and help them have a constructive conversation with that. I'm going to narrate. This is a game show, and I'm going to make sure I control the game here. So let them go back and forth and debate this. So that she leans into it. She frames it, say, hey, guys, you see what's happening here? This is fantastic. You guys have a different perspective on this. You both have a ton of experience. You guys are both after the same exact outcome. Careful, we might actually learn something here. So-and-so, describe to me why you don't think that would happen. And then I'd ask a question. And then they would give their perspective. And I go, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So-and-so, you just listened to that. Now give me your perspective based upon what they just said. And they engage the two people in having a constructive conversation. Instead of being like, hey, guys, no, it's fine. So, hey, guys, no, we get it. Because they're uncomfortable. It's no, use it as an opportunity and frame it from a place of, hey, guys, this is huge opportunity here. Let's engage in this and let's find out if we're missing something. Let's find out if we could learn something here. And what ends up happening from my experience is those two people, they need that because their emotions will drive their conversation unless they get a framing. And framing allows you to have bumpers on each side of the road. You're driving down the road, and now if you don't have the bumpers, you'll go off into the medium and you'll wreck. But if you put the bumpers, if somebody else comes down and puts the bumpers, it's like, okay, cool, now we can't go off the road. Let's drive the car. Let's go where we're trying to go, and we know what the rules of the game are. So I would just encourage you, if you're on this call and you're a leader or you aspire to be a leader, if you see two team members having this engagement, especially after hours when you go grab a beer or you go have drinks afterwards and you're engaged in a conversation about how you should quote something and how you should do this, use it as an opportunity to frame the conversation, interject and say, hey guys, this is amazing. Guess what? This is happening. This is a unique opportunity. Let's do, and what'll end up happening is you will give people permission to stay within the lines and stay logical instead of emotional. So, but we're past 9:30. I know I ranted there. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in. For those of you who are new, Joanne, I heard you check in. Thank you for being on your first personal development call, man. This is just an opportunity for us to get better. Huge deal that you're on, man. I'm sure hopefully you get the shout out. Thank you so much. And for everybody who participated tonight, thank you so much. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that stuff. This to me is such a huge passion of mine. I think we could do more on this because everybody at some point or another will encounter this. And it's one of the major things why people leave companies. It's because they don't feel like they could have constructive conflict somewhere. This is a place where we feel safe to have cool discussions, to explore, to be better, and to be vulnerable and let the ego down. So thank you so much for showing up tonight, guys. You guys are amazing. We'll see you tomorrow. If I don't see you tomorrow and you're in a different market, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Well, guys, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please share that with every person you know. God, that's so good, man. And remember, life is not ordinary. It's meant to be extraordinary.